The transfer pod docked at Station Meridian 7 at 0340 station time, which meant Commander Zeth Varro was dragged out of his rest cycle by a junior officer who clearly did not value his own continued employment. Zeth had 4 arms, 6 sensory tendrils, and exactly 0 patience for interruptions during his rest period. He made this known as he marched down the corridor toward Intake Bay 3, his uniform still half-sealed, his mood approximately equivalent to a pressurized reactor with a cracked valve. "This better be worth waking me for," he announced to no one in particular. "High-priority transfer." "Sir," said Officer Bren, a young Calvari who moved with the anxious energy of someone who had made a mistake and was not yet sure how bad it was. "Direct authorization from Council oversight. 3 clearance codes, biometric verification, the whole sequence." Zeth stopped walking. 3 clearance codes meant political weight. Political weight meant either a war criminal or a diplomat caught doing something embarrassing. Either way, it meant paperwork that would consume the next week of his life. "Species?" he asked. Bren hesitated. That hesitation told Zeth everything before the words came out. "Human, sir." There was a long pause. Then Zeth continued walking, but slower, with the particular energy of someone recalibrating their irritation downward. He had been pulled from sleep for a human. A human. He had processed Velthari assassins who could phase through solid matter. He had once personally supervised the detention of a Garathi warlord whose biological waste was classified as a chemical weapon. He had a Roccan information broker in Cell Block 4 right now whose mere presence required the station's entire psionic suppression. Grid to run at full capacity. And someone had woken him up for a human. What did it do? He asked, allowing the diminutive pronoun because at this hour he did not have the patience for species-sensitive language protocols. "She," Bren corrected carefully, because the junior officer apparently had either courage or a death wish. "Her name is Elena Vasquez, forensic auditor. She was attending the Meridian Corporate Accountability Summit as part of a human delegation. Arrested for unauthorized access to restricted financial data networks. She hacked something. Technically, sir, the legal team says it is complicated. She accessed data she was not supposed to access. But she claims she had implied authorization based on her audit mandate. And the arresting delegates claim she had no such authorization. And the council decided to detain her pending a formal review. So she is here because corporate executives got their feelings hurt. That is one way to characterize it. Sir, Zeth arrived at Intake Bay 3. The pod had already been opened, and the human was standing in the center of the room with 2 armed guards on either side of her, looking like she had been waiting for him specifically and found the wait only mildly inconvenient. She was shorter than he expected. Most humans were compared to his own 2-meter frame. Dark hair pulled back from her face, brown skin, eyes that were a very ordinary shade of brown, which meant they did not glow or shift color or rotate independently. She was wearing what appeared to be business attire that had been somewhat crumpled by the transport process, and she was standing with her hands clasped in front of her in a posture that communicated patience rather than fear. That was the first thing Zeth noticed. No fear. Every species showed fear differently. Velthari went cold and still. Calvari chittered their backplates together. Even Garathi showed something, a tension in the brow ridges, a subtle darkening of the skin. Humans, from what Zeth understood, went pale or flushed, their pupils dilated, their breathing became shallow. None of that was happening. Elena Vasquez was looking at him with calm, attentive eyes and waiting. "Commander Zeth Varro," she said. Her translator rendered the words in the station's primary language with a faint accent. "I appreciate you coming down personally. I know it is late in your cycle." She knew his name. She knew his rank. She had probably read his file on the transport over. "Ms. Vasquez," he said, keeping his voice professionally flat. "You are being detained pending review of charges filed by delegates of the Meridian Corporate Accountability Summit. You will surrender all personal effects, submit to biometric processing, and be assigned temporary quarters in cell block 7. Do you understand these terms?" "I do," she said. "I would also like to note, for the official record, that I am invoking my rights under Galactic Council Detention Standards 7.4, which entitles me to written documentation of all charges within 2 station hours of intake. I would like that documentation delivered to my quarters. Also, if possible, I would like something to eat. I have not had a meal since approximately 0900 this morning, and the protein options on the transport were inadequate." Zeth stared at her. "I am not trying to be difficult," she added, sounding genuine. "I just do my best thinking when I am not hungry. And I suspect we will be having some conversation soon that will require me to be at my best." The intake scan revealed her personal effects: 1 stylus, slim and silver, the kind used for writing on digital surfaces; 1 pair of reading glasses, thin-framed, no electronic components; a small notebook, actual paper, actual pages, which the scanner flagged as unusual but harmless; 2 protein bars, individually wrapped, nutritional content listed; a small metal pin on her jacket lapel, shaped like a set of scales, the universal symbol for legal balance. That was everything. Zeth looked at the scan results for a long moment. He thought about the Velthri arms dealer in cell block 2 who had required 17 separate containment protocols and a dedicated disruption field that cost the station more per hour to run than Zeth's entire salary. He thought about the biometric suppression collar they had needed to fit the Rockin' broker with to prevent passive psychic contamination of the entire cell block. He thought about the fact that he had been woken up for a woman with a notebook and 2 protein bars. "Processor," he said. "Standard cell block 7 protocols. Class F classification." "Yes, sir," Brun said. Zeth was already walking away. He did not read the full human species file that night. He looked at the summary, which said Class F. Functionally low threat, recommend standard containment. And then he went back to sleep because he had a Velthri arms dealer to deal with in the morning and a Garathi diplomat arriving in 2 days and approximately 40 other things that required his attention. More than 1 corporate auditor with a stylus. He would regret this. He would, in fact, regret this quite specifically and in detail. But that came later. The morning briefing was routine. Zeth sat at the head of the table in his operations room, reviewed overnight reports, drank his first cup of stimulant broth, and listened to his officers go through the standard updates. Cell Block 2 was stable. The Rockin' broker had attempted to establish a psychic link with a cleaning drone, which was irritating but not dangerous. Environmental systems in the outer ring were running 2 degrees below optimal, which maintenance was addressing. The human? Zeth asked, mostly because it was on the list. Senior Officer Dana, who had more experience than anyone else on his team and showed it in the careful economy of her movements, glanced at her datapad. Quiet night. Complied with all intake procedures without incident. Ate her provided meal, apparently requested additional seasoning through the standard request channel, was denied per protocol, accepted the denial without complaint. Guard's report she read for approximately 3 hours before sleeping. Read what? Station regulations, sir. The full operational manual. Dana paused. All 1,200 pages of it. The room was quiet. She read 1,200 pages of station regulations, Zeth said slowly, in one night. She appears to be a fast reader, sir. Also, she made notes. Dana set her pad on the table and slid it toward him. The guard doing the cell check reported she had filled approximately 40 pages of her notebook. Zeth looked at the image the guard had captured through the cell observation port. Elena Vasquez was sitting cross-legged on her bunk, reading, glasses on, notebook open. Writing with the focused intensity of someone preparing for an examination. They intended to pass decisively. Something moved in Zeth's secondary stomach. It was a sensation he associated with situations that were about to become significantly more complicated than they appeared. "She's just reading," he said, more to himself than to his team. "Yes, sir," Donna agreed, in the tone of someone who was not entirely sure that was reassuring. The request came through official channels at 0900 station time. Formal, properly formatted, citing the exact regulation number that entitled detainees to consult with the station's legal compliance officer. Elena Vasquez was requesting a meeting. She had attached a preliminary document to the request, 11 pages long, which she had apparently written overnight and which outlined what she described as procedural irregularities in her arrest and intake process. Zeth read the 11 pages. Then he read them again. Then he called Dana into his office, handed her the pad, and watched her expression change as she worked through it. She identified 14 separate violations, Dana said finally. 14, Zeth confirmed. Some of these are technical, small things. But this one, Dana pointed to item 7. This one about the timing of the charge documentation. She is right. She was supposed to receive written charges within 2 hours of intake. We delivered them at 2 hours and 23 minutes. That is a legitimate procedural breach. Because Bren got the paperwork to the wrong officer first, and it had to be rerouted, Zeth said, rubbing 2 of his hands across his face. Yes, sir. A minor administrative error. But under Galactic Council Detention Standard 14.9, it creates grounds for a formal complaint that has to be reviewed by an independent oversight officer. Which means the council gets involved, Zeth finished. Which means this goes up the chain before the original charges have even been formally reviewed. He was quiet for a moment. She knew that. She knew that when she cited Detention Standard 7.4 last night. She was timing us. The words sat in the room like something heavy. Zeth pulled up Elena Vasquez's file on his screen. Not the summary this time. The full file. It was, he noticed with a sensation that was becoming familiar. Quite long. He started reading. By page 30. He had ordered his second cup of stimulant broth. By page 60. He had ordered a third. By page 94. Which covered human problem solving, methodologies and their neurological tendency to pattern recognize and strategize across all available information. He set down his cup very carefully and stared at the wall for a long moment. Dana, he said quietly. Sir? Get me everything we have on what data she accessed at the summit. Not the arrest report. The actual data. What was in those files she looked at before they detained her? Sir, that would require clearance from the summit delegates, who are the ones who filed the charges. I am aware, Zeth said. Get it, anyway. Whatever channels we have. He paused. And tell the kitchen to send something to cell block 7 with actual seasoning in it. Dana was quiet for a moment. The protein bars in her personal effects, sir. We confiscated those as standard procedure. I know we did. She arrived with 2 protein bars and a notebook and a stylus. And we locked her up and took her snacks. I am aware of how it looks. Sir, I think we may have... I know, Dana. Zeth turned back to the human species file. To the section he had just been reading, which used the phrase apex cognitive predator in a way that was doing very uncomfortable things to his understanding of the last 12 hours. I know exactly what we did. We confiscated her property. He thought of Elena Vasquez standing in intake bay 3 at 0340 in the morning, calm and attentive, knowing his name, knowing her rights, already thinking 6 moves ahead. We thought that made her harmless. He pulled up the live feed from cell block 7. Elena was sitting at her small desk, writing again, head bent, focused, unhurried. The picture of someone who was exactly where they had planned to be. We were wrong. The human species. File was 912 pages long. Zeth. Read the relevant sections twice. There was a chapter on human cognitive architecture that used clinical language to describe something that, once he understood it, made him feel as though the floor had shifted slightly beneath him. Humans did not simply solve problems. They could not stop solving problems. Their neural structure was wired for it in a way that was essentially involuntary. Every environment they entered was automatically being cataloged, analyzed, and filed away in a mental architecture built for survival in conditions that would kill most sentient species within hours. They did not need to consciously decide to assess a room for threats and opportunities. They just did it, continuously, the way other species breathed. The file called it environmental threat mapping. It was, the authors noted in the dry language of scientific documentation, extraordinarily efficient. There was also a section on human social behavior that Zeth found himself reading 3 times. Humans were intensely social creatures, but not in the herd animal sense that implied passive following of group behavior. They were social in the strategic sense. They built coalitions, established trust through small consistent actions, and had a finely calibrated instinct for identifying who in any group held actual influence versus surface authority. They did not just make friends. They built networks, often without fully conscious intent, simply because social cohesion had been a survival mechanism on their violent home world for so long that it had become instinct. Zeth closed the file. He pulled up the cell block 7 monitoring feed. Elena Vasquez was not alone. She was sitting in the common area outside her cell, which was technically permitted during the morning free period. And she was playing a card game with 3 inmates from different cell blocks, who had apparently gravitated toward her within hours of the morning period beginning. A Zulkrim merchant who was in for smuggling violations. An elderly Poron academic detained for possession of restricted historical documents. A young Calvary who had been arrested at the same summit as Elena on related but separate charges. They were laughing at something. All 4 of them laughing in a maximum security detention block at what appeared to be a card game that Elena had apparently taught them using her personal notebook pages. Hand-drawn, meticulous. How long has that been going on? Zeth asked. The social contact began approximately 40 minutes into the free period, Dana said from behind him, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone choosing their words. The card game started about 20 minutes later. Sir, she also helped the Poron gentleman adjust his bunk positioning to alleviate what he described as a persistent joint pain issue. She apparently has some knowledge of basic ergonomics. Of course she does. And she spent approximately 10 minutes with the Calvary, who appeared distressed about her upcoming hearing. Elena, Dana caught herself. The human detainee provided what the guard characterized as practical advice about the legal process and encouraged her to document her own procedural concerns in writing. Zeth turned slowly to look at Dana. She's telling other inmates to write down their grievances, he said, in detail, with regulation citations. Dana paused. She lent the Calvary her spare stylus. Zeth thought about what happened when multiple formal complaints from multiple detainees arrived simultaneously at the council oversight office citing the same facility for procedural violations. He thought about the independent review that would trigger. He thought about the audit team that would follow, and the access that audit team would have to station records, and the things that were in station records that certain parties would prefer remained unreviewed. He thought about the data that Elena Vasquez had accessed at the summit before her arrest. I need to know what was in those files, he said. Today, I am working on it, sir. There is some resistance from the summit delegates. There is always resistance from people with something to hide. Zeth straightened his uniform. I am going to speak with her directly. Is that advisable? Probably not. He was already moving. But neither was ignoring detention standard 7.4. Alina looked up when he arrived at the common area. The other inmates faded back toward their cells with the instinct of people who recognized when a private conversation was about to happen. Though the cavalry shot Alina a look that contained what Zeth was fairly certain was encouragement. Commander Zeth Vero, Alina said pleasantly, setting down her cards. I was expecting you might come by this morning. Were you? You seem like someone who does his due diligence once he realizes he missed something. She said it without accusation, simply as an observation. Please sit down. The chair is uncomfortable but functional. He sat, mostly because standing over her felt performative, given that she had clearly already outmaneuvered him twice before breakfast. You filed a formal complaint, he said. I filed a preliminary procedural observation, she corrected gently. The formal complaint comes after I meet with the legal compliance officer, which I requested yesterday and have not yet been granted. That is, incidentally, item 15. There are only 14 items on your document. The document I gave you yesterday, Elena agreed. I have been writing since then. Zeth absorbed this. Ms. Vasquez, I want to be direct with you. I prefer direct. Efficiency is important. I believe you were arrested because someone was afraid of what you found in those financial records. I believe the charges against you are, as you have suggested, an overreach. And I believe that you came to this station not just as a detainee, but as someone who intends to ensure that what you found does not disappear while you are conveniently locked away. Elena looked at him. For a long moment, her expression was, he noticed, not surprised. It was something closer to respect. You are smarter than the people who ordered my arrest thought you would be, she said. I read your file. Which one? The whole one. All 912 pages. Something shifted in her expression. It was brief, but Zeth caught it. A slight softening, something that might have been relief. Then you understand why I'm not frightened. I am beginning to understand a great many things. Alina leaned forward slightly, lacing her fingers together on the table. I am a forensic auditor, Commander. I have spent 22 years following financial corruption through corporate structures, designed specifically to prevent people like me from finding it. I am very good at finding things that people do not want found. She paused. 3 weeks ago, at the summit, I found something significant. Very significant. The kind of significant that involves station-level administrators, not just corporate delegates. The kind of significant that explains why my arrest was processed through 3 clearance codes at